Just one more. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to just mute you all for now. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to chime in anytime during the evening. And I just sent over to everybody material that we'll be using this evening. Okay, so good evening, everyone, and I'd like to start by reciting the name of the Buddha or the Nembutsu. So please join me in Gassho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. Oh, somebody else is joining. Let's let them in. All right. I'm going to meet you all one more time. Okay. So I have muted you all, and as I mentioned earlier, please feel free to chime in anytime you wish. So what we've been doing actually is we've been going over some of the primary teachings of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, and mainly I've been actually using this way as our text, if you will. Okay, the collected works of Shinran. If any of you have this, it's a very long, thick book, and some of you might use it to put yourself to sleep with too. It's can be very scholastic, but it contains all the writings of Shinran Shonin basically, and Shinran Shonin is the founder of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, and the first part of this, going up to in this book, it is the goes up to page 292 is what we call the true teaching, practice, and attainment of the Pure Land Way, or Kenjodo Shinjitsu Kyogyo Sho Monrui, or Kyogyo Shinsho for short in Japanese. And so we've been going over the very beginning part of this. And the reason why we're doing this is because it's within this book, the 6th chapter book, that the Shoshinge, the verse, the hymn, is written in. And it's actually, and so in the previous classes, we've been talking about, first of all, the teaching. What's the primary teaching? And that's what we call the largest sutra on Amida. And second, we went over some of what is the practice, and the practice is being the name, reciting the name of the Buddha. So if let me just bring that one up. If we just reviewing last time, last lecture, we ended up with a very important part to the lecture, and I'm just going to bring that up. And I'm going to share this. Oh, sorry, here we go. Share. Yes. The last time we ended, we said that the Shinran Shonin understood the Pure Land practice different from his predecessors, and how his acceptance of the 17th and 18th vow was as being made by Amida Buddha using what we call the non-discriminatory wisdom and compassion. The concept of the entrusting heart or Shinjin becomes paramount in understanding this thought. So this is where we sort of left off last week, but I need to expand on that. And so what I'm doing this week, I'm starting off. So before, let me expand this, way too small. Can you all see the lettering on this? Is it big enough for you? Can you see the lettering? Okay. First of all, can you all hear me okay? Yes, okay, good. Yes. Wanted to make sure. So before, so in this Kyojo Shinsho, in what we call chapter 2, the chapter on practice, and at the end of that chapter, near the end of that chapter, if you have the collected works of Shinran, it is on page page 68 of the collected works of Shinran, if anybody has it. Before Shinran gets into the writing the hymn on the true Shinjin and the Nembutsu, there's a very famous passage, and we call it the preface to the hymn of true Shinjin and the Nembutsu. And it's on page 68. And it's a relatively short piece, but it is so loaded with information that we need to actually examine this paragraph before we go any further. So in this short preface to the hymn of true Shinjin and Nembutsu, Shinran basically clearly defines what the true practice and what the true, what we call Shinjin, or faith, if you will, or entrusting heart is, and what it's based on. And then he also gives the reason for why he writes the hymn. So I'm just going to read this piece, and you can follow along. And I just sent it out to everybody, so you should have it, and you could read it later if you want. But Shinran reads, generally stated, with regard to the vows, there is true and real practice and Shinjin, and there is practice in Shinjin that are provisional means. The vow on which true and real practice is based is the vow that all Buddhas say the name. The vow on which true and real Shinjin is based is a vow of sincere mind and trust. These are the practice and Shinjin of the selected primal vow. Its practicers are all the good and the evil, the sages of the Mahayana and the Hinayana, and the foolish. Their birth is birth that is inconceivable. The Buddha and land are the fulfilled Buddha and fulfilled land. All of this is none other than the ocean of true reality or suchness, the inconceivable vow. This is the central purport of the larger sutra of the Buddha of immeasurable life. The genuine significance of the true essence of other power. Here then, wishing to realize the Buddha's benevolence and to respond in gratitude to the Buddha's virtue, I turn to Master Tanwan's commentary, which states, the Bodhisattva takes refuge in the Buddha, just as children obey their parents and loyal retainers follow their rulers, with their behavior not self-centered and their acts always according with reason. Since the Bodhisattva is aware of the Buddha's benevolence and responds in gratitude to the Buddha's virtue, he naturally addresses the Buddha first. Moreover, Vasubandhu's aspiration is not undertaken lightly. How could it ever be fulfilled without the support of the Tathagata's majestic power? Here, Vasubandhu entreats the Tathagata to lend his majestic powers, hence he reverently addresses him saying, O world-honored one. Thus, taking refuge in the true words of the great sage and turning to the commentaries of the revered patriarchs, I realize the depth and vastness of the Buddha's benevolence and compose the following hymn. So this is the passage that actually comes out in Shinan's writing just before he actually writes what we call the Shoshin Nembutsuge, or the hymn on the true Shinjin and the Nembutsu. But this short passage itself is so full of meaning that I need to take it apart little by little. And so when we talk at the very beginning of this passage, he says, with regards to the vows, there is true and real practice and shinjin. And there is practice and shinjin that are provisional means. Okay, just in this one line alone, there's four things that we understand. First of all, he says that there's true and real practice and true and real shinjin. And conversely, he also says there are practices that are provisional means and shinjin that are provisional means. So there are four different things he's mentioning, alluding to. And when he says the practice, so the vow on which true and real practice is based is a vow that all Buddhas say the name. So if we go back to the 48 vows in the larger sutra, this is the 17th vow. So I've actually listed it down here. Okay, the true and real practice based on the vow that all Buddhas say the name. This is the 17th vow of the 48 vows made by Dharmakara Bodhisattva. And I've given this to you before, but it reads, if when I attain Buddhahood, innumerable Buddhas in the lands of 10 directions should not all praise and glorify my name, then may I not attain perfect enlightenment. And as I mentioned last week, that the completion of the Buddha's enlightenment was based upon completion of things that other Buddhas have done. So in other words, the other Buddhas in the 10 directions, they all have to praise the name of the Buddha or recite his name and say the name. And the question then becomes is that how come somebody else's action completes the Buddha's vow? And as I mentioned before, this is coming with the mind of what we call the non-discriminatory wisdom, where the self and other actually become one. So the fulfillment of the other Buddhas reciting the name, praising the name, is because they realize the greatness of the vow of Amida Buddha, the greatness of the working of Amida Buddha. And that's why they're praising the name. So those two are inseparable. In other words, without receiving or understanding the working of Amida Buddha, they would not praise the name. But because they understand that, they praise the name. And so that becomes the right act, if you will, to that Shinan alludes to in this passage. And then, as you can see, this vow, the 17th vow, is also known as the vow that all Buddhas praise the name. And that's what it says in this passage. that is based on the vow that all Buddhas say the name. Okay, so that's just another way of saying the 17th vow. And then that same passage, the next line reads, the vow on which true and real Shinjin is based on the vow of sincere mind and trust. And this is, of course, what we call the 18th vow. Okay. And that is number 2 here. It says true and real Shinjin, or entrusting heart, is based on the vow on sincere mind and entrusting. This is the 18th vow in the 48 vows made by Dhammakara Bodhisattva. And again, it reads, if when I attain Buddhahood, sentient beings in the lands of the 10 directions who sincerely and joyfully entrust themselves to me, desire to be born in my land and call my name even 10 times, should not be born there, then may I not attain the perfect enlightenment. Excluded, however, are those that commit the 5 grave offenses and abuse the right dharma. Okay, so this is the 18th vow. We won't get into the exclusionary comment at the bottom here. I'll leave that out for the time being. But again, this vow is seen to be the most important one, hence we call it the primal vow, or in Japanese, the Hongan. And that's why our temple is called the Honganji, the temple of the primal vow. And again, the other ways of calling this vow is the vow of sincere mind and entrusting, which Shinan has used in this passage. So he says that the vow on which true and real Shinjin is based is the vow of sincere mind and trust. So this sincere mind and entrusting is basically, again, this is from the mind of non-discriminatory wisdom, or praja paramita, the non-discriminatory wisdom, coming from the side of the infinite. And this is when we receive the working of the Buddha, and when we truly from the bottom of our hearts realize the working, the oneness that exists, then we have a desire, or we entrust ourselves to the name, and we are then recite the name, not out of my will or my wanting merit, but through gratitude to the working of the Buddha. And I'll explain about this in just a second. So basically, he says that those who follow this, or that the real Shinjin is based on this 18th vow. And this real Shinjin is seen to be the root or the cause of our being born into the Pure Land. Or another way of putting it, I guess, is for us to attain nirvana in the end, is through entrusting to the working of the Buddha. And then he goes on here, he says that these are the practices Shinjin of the selected primal vow. Its practitioners are all the good and the evil, the sages of the Mahayana and the Hinayana, and the foolish. So basically, what Shinan Shonin is stating here is that this vow, or this teaching, the practice, and the true Shinjin are for all sentient beings. So whether it's beings from the past, the more conservative, the Hinayana, or what we call the Theravada branch of Buddhism, or the Mahayana branch, for the wise, the foolish, for the good and the evil, it's for all sentient beings that this true practice and Shinjin, or faith in trusting, is. So it means it's for all beings and all places and time that this vow is truly the most important vow or teaching. And then there's a short sentence that says, their birth is birth that is inconceivable. Okay. And again, there's reference, this is referring to something. And the birth that is inconceivable. So in the Pure Land teachings, where is that? Oh, sorry, before I get there. So also, as I mentioned in the first line, it talks about the true and real practice and the true and real shinjin. And then he says there's also the practice that is provisional means, right? And so what that means is that Shinran also recognized, and this is based on the vow of performing meritorious acts, which is what we call the 19th vow in the 48 vows. And it reads, if when I attain Buddhahood, beings in the lands of the 10 directions who awaken aspiration for enlightenment, do various meritorious deeds and sincerely desire to be born in my land, should not at their death see me appear before the surrounded by see me appear before them, surrounded by a multitude of sages, then may I not attain perfect enlightenment. Okay, where's that? Okay. And this is known also as the vow of performing meritorious acts. I'll come back to this in just a second, but I just wanted to go on. Shinjin that is provisional is based on the vow of sincere mind and directing merit. This is the 20th vow of the 40th vows. And it reads, if when I attain Buddhahood, beings in the lands of the 10 directions who, having heard my name, concentrate their thoughts on my land, do various meritorious deeds, and sincerely transfer their merits towards my land, and with a desire to be born there, should not eventually fulfill their aspiration, then may I not attain perfect enlightenment. And this is also known as the vow that beings ultimately attain birth, or the vow of sincere mind and directing merit. So this vow of directing merit is very, keep that in the back of your mind. And the reason why, oh, okay, yeah. So, well, I'll come back to this in just a second, but as I mentioned earlier, that Shinran stated that the practices are all the good and the evil, the sages of the Mahayana and Hinayana and the foolish, meaning that this is both true and real practice and Shinjin are for beings of all times and places. And then Shinran then says, their birth is birth that is inconceivable. And this, again, has a reference. And what it is this. So it says in Pure Land teachings that those who practice various meritorious acts with the desire to be born into the Pure Land, at the moment of death, they see the image of the historical Buddha when he passed away at the Sala Grove at Kushinagra, and are born into a provisional land where they remain for hundreds of years before moving on to the fulfilled land. So because they see this, the passing of the Buddha at the Sala Grove, this birth is sometimes referred to as the rebirth under the Sala Tree Grove, or in Japanese, Soju Ringe Ojo. Okay, so what this means is that the 19th vow back here, the one of provisional practice, is doing various meritorious deeds. So the individuals here, they do have a desire to be born in the Pure Land, but they figured they need to do all these other activities as well. So they're not completely entrusting themselves to the working of Amida Buddha. They think they have to do all these different things. When we have some of you who have a background maybe from Japan, you've probably heard the term bachi ga ataru. And Karen, you know that term? Bachi ga ataru? Yes, you probably heard that. So bachi ga ataru means, if we translate it in English, it means you're going to be hit for doing something wrong. If you do something that's sort of not the right act or not being good, then it says bachi ga ataru, which can literally mean being hit by the stick. And what this is referring to is the fact that, you have to do all these things in the proper way in order to appease the gods, or appease our deities. So often, in Japan, they have a lot of superstition. Actually, I was just at the funeral home today, and I heard an interesting Chinese superstition. I didn't know this until today. But one of the things that I was told was that when the Chinese pass away, they never put glasses on the individual. Even if they wore glasses throughout their life, they will not put glasses on them in the casket. And the director said the reason is that there was a belief that when visitors or people, the mourners, come to see the individual, the reflection of the glasses, the last person that is reflected is the next person to die. Is a superstition that exists. So they never put glasses onto the individual. Okay. When I talk about various meritorious acts, however, it's nothing like that. It was believed that in order to get to the Pure Land, you had to do many different things, including worshiping the Buddhas, chanting, making offerings, and all these various acts that you can do. And so this one in particular, Shinran focuses on what we call the Meditation Dhyana Sutra. And this Meditation Dhyana Sutra is one of the 3 Pure Land Sutras, but the large portion of this sutra teaching is based on what we call contemplation, and how one can visualize the Pure Land. And Shakyamuni Buddha gives a direction to the primary audience, Vaidehi, on how she can visualize the Pure Land and the Buddha. And it's a step-by-step process. And there's, in fact, 13 visualizations that one does, starting with visualizing on the setting sun to the west over the ocean. And so you contemplate on that. And then as you follow the setting sun, then you visualize the Pure Land in the west. So you begin to visualize. And then it gets into details of visualizing on the grounds of the Pure Land, and et cetera, and ultimately coming with a visualization of Amida Buddha, the image of Amida Buddha, and the physical being of Amida Buddha. So these are called various meritorious acts, each of these visualizations. So this is one of what we call a provisional act, or practice that is provisional. All these various means. And so according to the teachings, it said when we say provisional means, they're used temporarily to guide people deeper into the teachings. And so for those people who are still unsure of there's this teaching that takes them down to a certain understanding. And according to this, it says that those who follow these meritorious acts, well, what happens at the time of death is they see the Buddha with his multitude of sages. And this is apparently the vision of when the historical Buddha passed away at Kushinagra. And therefore it's called the rebirth under the Sala tree grove, okay? Because it's referencing that. And so those people are then born into a provisional land, and they have to spend number of years there before they can move on to what we call the fulfilled land. And so that was the one kind of birth. And then there's another kind of birth, those who practice solely on the Nembutsu, but still practice it with the idea that their recitation on Nembutsu will create merit for the self. And thus this form is still considered what we call self-power. And those who recite the Nembutsu with the idea of merit for the self are still said to have doubt in the complete working of Amida Buddha, and their birth is said to be rebirth that is difficult to fathom, or in Japanese, Nanji Ojo. And they are also said to be born into the provisional land before they eventually move onto the fulfilled land. So this is referencing the 20th vow. Okay, so in that opening passage, it says there is Shinjin that is also provisional. Shinjin is entrusting heart, that is provisional. And what this vow is the vow of sincere mind and directing merit, or the 20th vow. And again, it is the idea that the people are concentrating on strictly doing the Nembutsu practice, reciting the name of the Buddha, but this practice is still self-centered in that they're doing it with thinking that each recitation of the Nembutsu has some merit, virtue that they can gain. And so, in fact, there are practices in Japan. Most famous one is reciting the name of the Buddha 1,000,000 times. 100,000 ben Nembutsu. And what that 100,000 ben Nembutsu is, they have beads like this, except it's very, very, very large. Like each bead is maybe about this big, about that big, each bead, maybe even bigger. And they sit in a circle, the people that do this practice, and they recite the Nembutsu. As they do, they pass on, they rotate the beads, if you will. And they're supposed to do it a total of 100,000 ben, which is 1,000,000. Yeah, 1,000,000 times that they're supposed to recite it. And by doing so, they feel that they gain that much merit in reciting the name. And Shinran himself said that this is still self-power, what we call self-power practice, because they haven't completely entrusted themselves to the working of Amida Buddha. They still want this ego-centered, I am gaining merit by doing this practice. And this is probably one of the hardest things to get rid of. In fact, Shinran Shonin himself, in the letters written by Eshini, his wife, to their daughter Kakushini after Shinran passed away, she talks about a time when Shinran Shonin became ill with high fever. There was a illness that was going around Japan. Many people were dying from it, just like the plague, just like the COVID that we have now. And in his delirium, with his high fever, Shinran started chanting the sutras, the larger sutra. And his thought was the more he chanted the larger sutra, he would benefit others through his action. Then the fever breaks and Shinran realizes that he's still thinking that his actions are going to benefit others. And he felt that this was still a self-centered way of thinking. And he realizes what he really needs to do is just completely let go and rely or let the Buddha do the working. So this recitation of the name of the Buddha, but still with this thought in mind of transferring merit, is the 20th vow And this birth is called the rebirth that is difficult to fathom. But because of their still clinging somewhere within to the self and the merit that the self can create, they end up in this provisional land before finally moving onwards. So both of these two, the first two, even though they're born into what we call this provisional land, ultimately they do get to the fulfilled land. However, those who practice a true practice and true Shinjin of just reciting the name of the Buddha with complete and trusting heart for the true working of Amida Buddha, these individuals' birth is known as a rebirth that is inconceivable, or in Japanese, Nanjiki Ojo. Nanjiki Ojo. Their birth is inconceivable because it is beyond our capacity to understand how beings filled with blind passion could be born into the Pure Land through the working of the primal vow. It is written that such beings of utter, or it should be utter futility, sorry, not utterly. Utter futility is the true intent of the other power of Amida Buddha, and is also the true reason for the Buddha appearing in this world to expound the teaching of Amida Buddha. So if we go back to that passage, the preface to the hymn, this is what Shinran says. Their birth is birth that is inconceivable. See, this is the rebirth, the third form of rebirth is the birth that is inconceivable. And again, it's not because of who we are, or in fact, it is because who we are. We are beings full of blind passion, but because we are full of blind passion, the Buddha, or that's the true intention of Amida Buddha, is just for such a being, that this compassion, this wisdom exists, this non-discriminatory wisdom exists. So the fact that even such a being as myself, full of these blind passions, am allowed to be born in the Pure Land is truly inconceivable work of the Buddha. When we read or listen to Shinran's writing like this, we begin to realize, or one might think, well, Shinran is very, very self-deprecating. It sounds so like I'm a complete heel, if you will. And in fact, Shinran calls himself Gutoku, which is foolish, stubble-haired being, right? He says, Gutoku, I, Gutoku Shinran. I, this foolish, stubble-haired being, full of blind passions, basically. And this self-deprecation, or this view of the self, actually only comes about through really deep reflection on the self. So basically what Shinran did through the 20 years that he spent on Mount Hiei, the practices that he went, he really, really examined the self. And he came to realization of a self that was not that flattering, a self that was very dark, a self that was all-consuming. Yet at that very instant, he also came to realize the great working, or the power of the Dharma, that such a being is in fact the focus of Shakyamuni's teachings. And I think, just listening to it and intellectualizing it up here is on one level of understanding. But I think when Shinran comes right down to it, it's the very deep reflection. It is the same, or it is the analogy of the two rivers and the white path. And I've mentioned that before. And then from Shantou or Zendo Daishi's teaching about the traveler traveling to the west, and he suddenly comes on this river of fire and river of water. I think the river of fire was to the north and river of water was to the south. And there's a very, very narrow path, white path, 3 to 4 inches wide, that goes into the river. But overlapping this path are both raging water and fire. And so the traveler pauses, and initially the traveler thinks, okay, I will go back the way I came. But as he looks over his shoulder, he sees bandits chasing after him from the direction that he came. So he realizes, oh, I can't go backwards. Then he thinks, maybe I'll go up and down the shore that I'm on to find a easier place to cross. And as he looks north and south, he sees these wild beasts running towards him. So he's stuck. He thinks, if I go forward, I'm sure to die. If I retreat, I'm sure to die. And if I stand still, I'm sure to die. But at that instant, he makes up his mind that the only way to go is to go forward. And even though the path is very narrow and it's being lapped over by fire and water, he figures, I'm going to go. And the moment he makes that decision, he also hears the voice from the other side saying, come as you are, I will not let you fall in. And so he starts going forward. And he hears the bandits in the back saying, oh, come back. We don't mean you any harm. But he doesn't look backwards. And then he hears another voice from the back. But this time, it's not the bandits. It's more of a reassuring voice that said, go as you're going. Follow that voice from the other shore. And soon the traveler makes it to the other shore and is greeted by a good friend. And that's how this parable goes. And of course, Shantou, in his explanation, says that this parable is about each of us. We're on this journey in our life. West meaning the direction that the sun sets, the direction that we ultimately return to. And as we go on this journey, the bandits from in the back are our past karma, all of our past actions trying to catch up to us. The beasts on the either side, north and south, are all the actions, all the things around us in the present that try to sway us from the path, temptations, if you will. And then going forward, the river of fire, river of water are lust and anger. And the white path is the single path that we can follow through. So when the traveler pauses and thinks, if I go forward, I'm sure to die. If I go back, I'm sure to die. If I stay still, I'm sure to die. Of course, we call this the 3 points of death. It's that moment where we're feeling at utter despair, at a deep loss. But at that same instance, there is a path that's seen. And when we make that determination, at that instant, we hear the calling voice. And that's the voice of Amida Buddha that says, come as you are. So when we think about Shinnan's words, that, those who practice the true practice, true Shinjin, of just reciting the name of the Buddha and completely entrusting ourselves to the true working of Amida Buddha, these are the beings for who the other power was meant, and they are the beings of total, utter futility. This, for Shinran, was himself. And so ultimately, at one point in all our lives, we come to that realization. Everything that we do has some element of ego attached to it. And it's only when we truly, we can't even really let go. But when we're at that point, we do hear the calling voice of the Buddha. And that's true. What's important here, though, is that's through constant listening. So without that constant listening, that awakening also doesn't happen. So all these lectures, all the Dharma talks, it doesn't have to be lecture Dharma talk. Life itself, as we open our ears to life, we begin to see the lessons that are being taught. And through those lessons of life, we begin to realize ultimately is to let go and just accept the working of the Buddha. And so this is what Shina is saying in this preface to the that, you know, those that all the beings who accept this, their birth is a birth that is inconceivable. That's the one that we're talking about, the rebirth that is inconceivable. And the land that we are born into is what we call the fulfilled Buddha and fulfilled land. This is an expression of thusness, or so it says here. All this is none other than the ocean of true reality or suchness. Okay, so this is the inconceivable Dharma itself. It opens up to us when we truly receive the working of the Buddha. So this is what Shina is saying. And he says this is, in fact, the essence of other power of the largest sutra, or the reason for the largest sutra of the Buddha of immeasurable life. And again, this is why Shina states that the Buddha came into this world, was to ultimately teach this teaching. It is a teaching for all beings. You can be wise, you can be a monk, but you can also be foolish. You can be even evil here, it says. Okay. So then, with this great sense of gratitude that he had, Shinanden says, I bore the words of the master Tan Luan's commentary. And here in this italicized passage, so the Bodhisattva takes refuge in the Buddha, just as how do you pronounce this? Filial? Children obey their parents, and loyal retainers follow the rulers with their behavior not self-centered and their acts always according with reason. This part here, since the Bodhisattva is aware of the Buddha's benevolence and responds in gratitude to the Buddha's virtue, he naturally addresses the Buddha first. Okay, up to here, this is talking about actually in the largest sutra, there is a song, and we chant it on a regular basis, the Sambutsage, right? Sambutsage. The Sambutsage comes out of the largest sutra, and it is just before the Bodhisattva Dhammakara makes the 48 vows. So before he's making the 48 vows, this Bodhisattva called Bodhisattva Dhammakara, he is in front of a Buddha, Avalokiteshvara Buddha. Oh wait, is that Kanno? Wait, Sejizai Obutsu. He's in front of the Buddha, and because of the Buddha's teachings, Bodhisattva Dhammakara desires to be born or to attain enlightenment. And so in order to attain enlightenment, the Avalokiteshvara Buddha shows him many Buddha lands. And Dhammakara says, oh, I want to take all the best virtues from all the Buddha lands. And in order to complete that, I then make the 48 vows. But before he makes the 48 vows, he praises the Buddha. And so that's what we call the Sambutsuge. Okay, so this passage here is referring to that. The Bodhisattva is aware of the Buddha's benevolence and responds in gratitude to the Buddha's virtue. He naturally addresses the Buddha first. If you read the Sambutsuge, it starts off by praising the Buddha by Bodhisattva Dharmakara. And then after he's praised the Buddha, he says, when I become a Buddha, this is the kind of Buddha I want to be. I want to be the kind that saves all sentient beings. So the Sambutsuge is basically, in a nutshell, that. First praising the Buddha, and then saying, when I become a Buddha, this is the kind of Buddha I want to be. Okay, and so that's what this part is referring to, is that, again, this following, as a child obeys the parents and loyal retainers follow the rulers, they do it not for their own benefit, but they follow, they're reacting actually to the working of their parents. If we take the case of a child to a parent, when the children want to look after their parents, it's because they've received the love from their parents. Similarly, as I mentioned in a previous, or actually, it was Francis that brought it up. When the child says mother for the first time, it's because they've heard the word mother over and over by their mother in the first year of life, as the mother comforts that child. And so when that child receives that love or acknowledges that love, the word mother comes out, right? So similarly, he's saying this, that when they follow or when they practice, it's not because of self-benefit, but it's following because they receive the great teaching that they naturally, out of gratitude, they do it. And again, he then quotes Vasubandhu's aspiration, and the Vasubandhu's aspiration is being born in the Pure Land. And Vasubandhu was the second of the 7 patriarchs, and we'll get into him again. But again, so at the end of this passage, Shinran says, thus taking refuge in the true words of the great sage, so this is the Shakyamuni Buddha, and turning to the commentaries of the revered patriarchs, these are the 7 patriarchs through China, through India, China, and Japan, and we'll get into this as well. I realize the depth and vastness of the Buddha's benevolence and compose the following hymn. Okay, so this is right before he writes the Shoshinge. And as I explained, this has this short passage has so much meaning in it. Yeah, so I just went over what is inside this short passage, right? And this concludes this part on the preface. So, how many of you are totally confused? And if you are, that's fine. You can unmute yourself now, and we'll go in. I will. Any comments or questions or?
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
So to summarize, what you said was, if you the 18th vow will take you straight to the Pure Land, but the 19th and 20th vow will take you to the provisional land, which will eventually take you to the Pure Land. Is that
Exactly.
okay?
So the provisional land is said to also have been created through the Dharma as a way to ultimately getting you to the fulfilled land. But some people might not be ready to complete, it's really difficult to just say letting go completely, right? And so
be in the waiting room.
some people might think, we need to do all these different things, and that's okay. They will ultimately get there, but it'll take them a little longer. But
So,
as long as you're not completely slandering, well, even ultimately, Shina says, even for those who are or who might slander, well, actually, if you do slander the teaching, you won't be born into the Pure Land. And there's no reason why you would be. Why would you be born there if you have no desire to be born there? But that exclusionary clause in the 18th vow is actually seen, according to Shinran, as very important, because it's forewarning beings that this is really bad. But even if you do this, the Buddha will ultimately lead you to what we call the Pure Land or enlightenment. And again, it's more to do with not my working, but ultimately it is the working of the Dharma. And this what I mentioned about the non-discriminatory wisdom, which is the ultimate. Wisdom and compassion go hand in hand, and out of pure compassion, the Buddha provides a means for all beings to ultimately attain realization or awakening. Okay.
Can I-
Anybody?
oh, sorry.
Yes. Go ahead.
One question. So, you talk about provisional land. Is that the same as in one of the sutras? I think they talk about people are born into lotus flowers or something.
Yeah. So
is that the same thing?
Yeah. So there's different ways of calling it. That's one is said that you're within. You're actually in the Pure Land, but you're in a closed lotus blossom for 500 years, so you don't realize you're in the Pure Land. There's also another explanation of a womb-like existence. So you're born into this womb, and you don't realize that you're. I guess until your birth, you don't realize you're in the Pure Land. So yeah, these are all different explanations or expressions of what we call the provisional land. In Japanese, we'll call it kedo. And so it's sort of like, and sometimes they refer to as borderland as well. These are all expressions. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Michael. Please feel free to unmute yourself, Michael.
Okay, I've unmuted myself. One of the things that always puzzles me in reading the largest sutra relating to this being born in borderland or provisional means is in one section just prior to the introduction to the five evils. It's stating that you will be born in a borderland, confined in a palace made of 7 kinds of jewels, where you'll suffer all forms of adversity for 500 years. And then further on, when it gets to a latter part, it's saying there you do not receive any punishment or experience even a moment's discomfort. However, for 500 years, they will neither be able to see 3 treasures nor cultivate various roots of good. And then it continues on. They seem to be saying somewhat opposite things to me.
Well, it's what it's showing you is that what we can see as what we would consider luxury is actually very painful if you can't listen to the Dharma. Okay. So you could be in a jewel place, but it's nothing compared to being able to listen to the Dharma. Right? There's no comparison. So that's how important the Dharma is, basically, right? You're in this beautiful palace, and it actually tells us about our when you think about our present existence, you hear of these people who are materialistically so well off, these Hollywood stars or whatever, and yet they commit suicide.
Right.
So there's a discord between the disconnection between, the physical as what's inside. And I think what this is expressing is that even a jewel palace can be a prison if you can't listen to the Dharma.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Atsumi-san, you had something to say?
はい。I have very basic question. Embarrassingly, I don't understand Amida Buddha. They must be existed before historical Buddha.
Yes. So,
And then I don't really have enough introduction because Amida Buddha must be once human being.
So the whole story of Amida Buddha, we call it sacred story. So we don't place it in time and space. It's beyond time and space. It is explained in a way that we can understand it. So there's a story that's given behind it about this being who was a king of a kingdom, who came across the 53rd Buddha and was so moved by the Buddha's teachings that they decided they wanted to attain enlightenment. They had aspirations to attain enlightenment. And so then the Buddha, first of all, says to them that, he shows them all the different Buddha lands. Well, actually, no. The Buddha tells him he has everything he needs. And then this aspirant says, I have to look it up. It's got something to do with drinking all the ocean in the water in the ocean. And the Buddha is really moved by the aspirant's desire. And so he shows them all the different Buddha lands throughout the universe. And this is when this aspirant says, I want to take all the best aspects of these lands and makes these 48 vows. So there's a story that is associated with what we call Amida Buddha, but this is what we call a sacred story. And we don't necessarily say it's of this time or place. It transcends that. But what the story is trying to tell us is that there is, so in the Buddhist teaching, it tells us that there are different existence of what we call the Buddha bodies. So one is what we call Dhammakaya. Dhammakaya has no form, no shape. It's basically like the universe. It's very hard for us to grasp. It's so
Form and emptiness.
Yeah, no end.
it's the infinite. How do we grasp infinite? So from that Dharmakaya, though, it said the one thing that exists is compassion. And compassion and wisdom go hand in hand, and it has to express itself so that we can understand. And this is what we call the Sambhogakaya. Sambhogakaya means it takes on an appearance so that we ignorant beings can sort of grasp at it. So this is Amida Buddha. And there are many, many other Buddhas as well. These are what we call fulfilled Buddhas, and they are an expression of the infinite. So they come into this world, or they're expressed so that beings like myself can understand, there is something greater. And finally, the third Buddha body is Dharma body. We call it Nirmanakaya. And Nirmanakaya is the actual historical being that comes into this world to express, to teach us of this greater existence. So Nirmanakaya is the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha. He came into this world to teach us about things that are beyond our understanding. And it's said that all these different Dharma bodies, the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya, are actually all the same. So from this Dharmakaya, an expression has to come out, and that's Amida Buddha, or there's other Buddhas as well. And then those are expressed through Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha. So the historical Buddha talks about all these other different Buddhas, and these are all to help us, ignorant beings, help us to understand the truth. So basically, it's getting us to a higher consciousness. And so one can say that the story of Amida Buddha didn't exist in our time. One could say, though, that there is a truth that is expressed in this story. And that's what we're trying to acquire. Through all these great teachers that we've had, through all these great sages that we've had, they've guided us to see that there is a truth that is expressed, and it's expressed through the story. So all these, there are many, many stories that express truth and reality to us. And one could say the Bible is one of those, one such story that expresses a truth in one way. And the Buddha's teachings are a story that expresses truth in a different way, or in one particular way. And so that the whole story of Amida Buddha is an expression of truth, is what it is. I don't know if that's easier to understand or not. It might be still very difficult, and that's okay. That's okay. If it was easy, I don't think people would study it for a lifetime. So because it's hard, it doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. It means that you just have to think about it longer, I guess.
Sure.
And I think that's the important part is the path itself. Being on that journey is the important part.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Makes a lot of
thank you.
sense.
I will try to help as much as I can, but sometimes I may, you might find me, I may not be able to answer correctly, but that's okay too. Any other questions or comments, or? If not, thank you very much, everyone. And I'll see you next week then.
Thank you, Grant.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Grant,
Sensei.
Thank you, Reverend.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye all.
Good night.
Grant,
Yes.
could I ask a question once you stop recording?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Okay.
it's just